Okay, so let's think through this example. So we've got this function foo. It has four parameters, a, b, c, and d. And a is being passed by value, b is being passed by copy, c is being passed by reference, and d is being passed by name. So we have some initial values for some of these. Um, we have x being set to this array, we have y being set to 2, and then we call foo. We are passing x sub 0 as a, we're passing x sub 1 as b, y as c, and x sub y as d. So take a minute, pause the video, see if you can work this out on your own, and then once you have a guess as to what happens, then unpause the video and compare your answers. Okay, so here is all the initial values. So at the beginning of foo, this is what the values are going to be. So we've got x being 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got y, which is 2, which is its initial value. A is being passed by value. So what that means is that the value of the actual parameter x sub 0 is copied into A. And so x sub 0 here is 1, so A becomes 1. This is just the normal, passing uh, integer numbers around that you're familiar with from C and Java. All right, B is passed by copy, which means that at this point the semantics are the same. So x sub 1 is 2, and so now b is going to be 2. The difference between these two parameters is that at the end of the function, a is not copied back into x sub 0. However, the value of b at the end of foo is going to be copied back into x sub 1. And this is different. You probably have not seen a language that uses this semantics. It's rather confusing, and so a lot of languages do not use this. Okay, so then C is passed by reference, which means that inside of foo, C is actually a reference to Y. And what that means is that any change that we make to C is actually going to change Y. And again, you can sort of simulate this with pass by value if you have pointer types, because then you can pass the pointer by value and then use the pointer to manipulate the original. But in some languages, like with objects in Java, you can actually pass the parameter itself by reference. Okay, D is being passed by name. And this is that the one that I said is not terribly common. So you can think of this as like a C macro. So literally x sub y. So not an actual x or an actual y, but just the name, the text, the program code x sub y. That is what D is equivalent to. Okay, so let's step through each of these statements. So after statement one just increments A. And that's a pretty straightforward. A is being passed in by value, and so right now it's merely a local formal parameter. It's a local variable inside of foo. So that change will happen. So now A is 2, but this will not have any effect for the rest of execution because we don't use A anywhere else. B, it gets incremented on the next line, line 2. Remember that B is being passed by copy. So at this point, B changes, but even though the actual parameter for B is x sub 1, that will not be changed until the end of the subprogram. So you can see that its value is still 2. And then that will get updated with 3's or with B's value at the end of the subprogram. Okay, so what about line 3? So line 3 is incrementing C, and C is a reference to Y. And so in this language, we have we have pass by reference. And so what this means is that any change that happens to C is actually going to be made to Y. So at this point, C is not going to change. It's still a reference to Y, but Y is going to be incremented to 3. So that's the effect of line 3. Okay, D is the most complicated. So D is passed by name, which means that when we get down to this point, we are literally going to increment x sub y. And at this point, y is 3, which means that we are going to be incrementing the last element in x. So this 4 here turns into a 5. Note that this had nothing to do with the value of y when d was initialized, right? Because at that point, y would have been 2, right? So this is why the pass by name is very tricky, because it's really just passing in program code or some sort of equivalent representation. Okay, so then when we get back to 5, the only difference here is that our pass by copy parameter has been copied back out. Remember, we said that we would have to do that at the end of the subprogram invocation. And so at this point, we would then copy the value from B back to its actual parameter x sub 1. And so at this point, that entry changes to a 3 as well.